Well, good evening. Brother Guy Consolmagno, also known as the Pope's astronomer, is a planetary scientist at the Vatican Observatory. He is the curator of the Vatican Meteorite Collection, which is one of the largest in the world. He earned a degree from MIT and did postdoctorate work at MIT and the Harvard College Observatory. When he was 29, he joined the Peace Corps in Kenya. In 1992, he became a Jesuit brother. In the year 2000, he was honored by the International Astronomical Union for his contributions to the study of meteorites and asteroids with the naming of asteroid 4597 Consolmagno. He has authored several books, most recent being Would You Baptize an Extraterrestrial? And Other Questions from the Astronomer's Inbox at the Vatican Observatory. Oops, sorry. I apologize. This September, he was appointed as the director of the Vatican Observatory. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brother Guy.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. This is a remarkable turnout. Thank you all for coming. I am also speaking tomorrow at St. Michael's about my life at the Vatican Observatory, and you can ask questions about that at the Q&A. But I wanted to concentrate tonight on the topic that actually the Newman Center here asked me to address, Unpacking Laudato Si. And I know just a week and a half ago there was a program that addressed it from a different point of view. I hope that what I say complements the material that other programs have done, and I hope that it provokes a lot of questions and a lot of thinking, because I think that was really what the goal of the encyclical was all about. Now, most of what I'm going to say is going to be me talking and talking from slides. This is the first time I've ever given this talk. I'm not sure how smooth it's going to be, and I apologize. There's going to be a lot of word slides that I'll read. The only picture that I think is important to take a gander at is this one. It's a NASA image from the space shuttle, the late lamented space shuttle, of the Earth just as sun is rising. And because of the position of the sun, you can see that thin blue stripe, which is the Earth's atmosphere. And that's what we're talking about. That is the region where human beings live. It's a very narrow and a very delicate part of our much larger planet. And if we totally destroy the atmosphere, the planet will survive just fine, but we may not. This is the money quote that most of the newspapers reported when the Pope's encyclical came out. Climate change is a global problem with grave implications, environmental, social, economic, political, and for the distribution of goods. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. Its worst impact will probably be felt by developing countries in coming decades. And if that's all you got from reading the newspapers, it's not a bad message. But that's not really what the encyclical is about. And one of the biggest challenges, if you read the encyclical, is that everybody goes in expecting that, fearing that, having expectations about which of the things that I hold dear is he going to attack, or how well is he going to attack those people who I really don't like. And both sets of expectations are wrong, because that's not what he's doing in this encyclical. But before we go there, since climate change is what really attracts people's attention, I want to give you just a couple of comments about climate change. Most of you by now have heard the explanations and the descriptions over and over again. I think a lot of what I'm saying comes from my experience in the United States, where there are a large number of people who, for lack of a better term, would be called climate change deniers. And since one of my hats is fundraising from wealthy people, I run into them a lot. The basic fear that a lot of them have is that climate change is an invented crisis devised by the left as part of the culture wars to make people do things that they don't want to do and to get at those people who are like, it's a way of attacking people like me. I came from a pretty wealthy upper middle class background, a pretty comfortable life. I like technology. I like flying in airplanes. I like eating comfortable food. I don't like being attacked. And I don't like people who are going to use this to attack a lifestyle that, frankly, everybody else in the world would love to have too. My first experience of climate change was when I lived in that building, which was the Green Building at MIT. It's the building that houses the Earth Planetary and Atmospheric Sciences Department. And at least when I was there back in the 70s, the way it was arranged was the bottom floors were the geophysics of the interior of the Earth. By the time you got to the middle floors, that's where the geochemists were. As you get further up, you get to where the planetary scientists were. And then the top floors were where all of the atmospheric scientists were. Now, I'm not an astronomer, I am a planetary scientist. And one of the big challenges in the 60s was understanding, for example, why was Venus so phenomenally hot at its surface? We had only just learned this from measuring radio waves, including people at the MIT department. And Carl Sagan, in the 60s, had developed the theory that he's probably most famous for scientifically, the greenhouse gas theory, that said because Venus had a thick carbon dioxide atmosphere, the sunlight that penetrates to the bottom and gets turned into heat cannot escape until the surface is so hot that the prevalent wavelength reaches beyond the wavelengths that carbon dioxide traps. And finally, only when it's really hot can the energy that comes in finally get out. If energy gets in and doesn't get out, things get hot. Carl Sagan came up with that in the 60s. When I was there in the 70s, Ron Prynne, who looked much younger than that, this is a more recent picture, a young professor who had worked with the professor I was working with, was working on theories of climate in atmospheres around other planets, including Mars, including Uranus and Neptune, and indeed one of his students then, a woman named Heidi Hammel, has been observing Uranus and Neptune and looking at climate change there. Climate change is something that people were studying before the culture wars of the 90s. In fact, a friend of mine showed me this Reader's Digest from 1956. Reader's Digest, that notorious left-wing magazine. And here's an article that was originally in Life, What's Happening to the Weather? 1956. One hypothesis is based on the increase of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere since the 19th century Industrial Revolution pumped it there by burning coal and oil. Together with water vapor, CO2 forms a kind of veil over the Earth. Heat radiation from the sun, which comes in short waves, is able to pierce the veil, but the Earth emits heat in the form of long waves, which are partially blocked by the veil and therefore retrained. The more CO2, the smaller the amount of heat that can escape. Most experts believe that the weather will grow warmer, although there's no immediate prospect of palm trees in Maine or Siberia. In 100 years, or maybe 500 years, a cycle may establish itself indisputably, or new evidence will establish new explanations. Then man may learn what controls the thin, little, life-giving skin of air around his planet. 1956, they didn't have space images showing that thin veil, but the calculations showed that it existed. They were right. 1956, they were aware that carbon dioxide trapped air. Maybe in 50 or 100, well, guess what? That was 60 years ago. Maybe we're beginning to see evidence of it. But you know what? It's not just Reader's Digest. In the New York Times of October 28, 1956, Warmer climate in the Earth may be due to more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. According to a theory which was held half a century earlier. Despite nature's way of balancing the gases, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is being artificially increased. This was first pointed out by G.S. Callender about 7 years ago, but actually in the article, the atmosphere acts like the glass of a greenhouse. 1956, they were talking about that. All of this was brought to the attention of scientists by Tyndall in 1861. He didn't have the equipment we have today, but he was one of the first people to measure the amount of infrared radiation and how different gases would block infrared radiation. So the idea that carbon dioxide would be blocking the atmosphere is not a modern liberal conspiracy. Now, the question of what we can do about it, yes, it's absolutely true that the atmosphere of the Earth has changed its temperature radically over history. It has never changed it as quickly as it's changing now. There's another point besides just getting warmer. That's the global warming that people want to talk about. But we know it's more complicated than that. First of all, most of the warming occurs not here in the temperate areas, and yes, Canada is still temperate. It occurs in the poles. It occurs in the places where the pole caps can be melted. Yes, in some places the caps are getting thicker because there's more snow. You guys know how it works here in Toronto. It doesn't snow when it's really cold. It snows when the temperature is close to the melting point. Rising temperatures have led to more snowfall in some places. But more to the point, what's happening with carbon dioxide, a little molecule, it's got a carbon here and oxygen there. The carbon and the oxygen can vibrate in lots of different ways, including rotations, which means it's got lots of different ways in its vibrations of storing the energy that comes from wavelengths of just the right length, which is the wavelengths that we're trying to get off the Earth to cool it down. The carbon dioxide is storing the energy. Energy is released or absorbed as water vapor is evaporated or condenses into storms. It is the energy in the atmosphere that drives cyclones, that drives storms. As there is more energy in the atmosphere, you're likely to get more powerful storms. A lot of the carbon dioxide, in fact, has been dissolved in the oceans so that there's more places to store energy in the oceans, which gives rise to the El Niño effects, which drives the weather to make it more extreme. We know it's more complicated than just things will get warmer. We know that we don't know for sure what's going to happen. But whatever is going to happen, most of the possibilities are bad. We also know that the weather is a very nonlinear system. A small change could lead to radical changes in the way the climate functions. And we don't know where that small change border is going to be. We're running the experiment right now. We also know that there are natural ways that have nothing to do with what human beings have done, which could be changing the weather. There are lots of other things that change the weather. We'd better hope that climate change is being powered by human beings, because then at least we have something we can do about it. But the fact is, this book, Laudato Si, really is not about climate change per se, in spite of all the ways that it's been sold. It's a very small book. It's very short. It's very easy to read if all you're doing is counting the number of words. It's actually very hard to read, not because the language is tough, but because the ideas are so stark that you read a couple of paragraphs and you have to stop and think about them. How many people in this room have read Laudato Si at this point? A whole lot of you, so I think you know what I mean. What I want to do is start out by reminding you where the name comes from. It's a poem of St. Francis. Praised be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially Sir Brother Sun, who is the day and through whom you give us light, and he is beautiful and radiant with great splendor and bears a likeness of you, Most High. Praised be you, my Lord, through Sister Moon and the stars. In heaven you formed them, clear and precious and beautiful. Praised be you, my Lord, through Brother Wind, and through the air cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather, through whom you give sustenance to your creatures. Praised be to you, O my Lord, through Sister Water, who is very useful and humble and precious and chaste. Praised be you, my Lord, through Brother Fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. Praised be you, Laudato Si. Si does not mean yes, si means you in the Italian. When I realized I was giving this talk, I went and consulted a number of people who I know who have looked into this far more deeply than me. What I'm going to give you now is an outline I've adapted from one that Sister Linda Gibler, who's at the Lay Ministry Institute of the Oblate School of Theology in San Jose, put together for a talk. Because I think it's good to just remind ourselves of what's in the encyclical. It consists of 6 chapters. What's happening in our common home? What is the gospel of creation? What are the human roots of the ecological crisis? What do we mean by integral ecology? What are the lines of approach and action? What constitutes ecological education and spirituality? What's happening? He starts out by insisting he's drawing on the results of the best scientific research available today, but the church does not presume to settle scientific questions or to replace politics. What it wishes to do is to encourage an honest and open debate. The one key essential for an honest and open debate is to walk into it saying, I'm willing to have my mind changed. And that means everybody. That means my conservative friends, that means my liberal friends. Be prepared to be challenged. There are a number of problems on Earth: pollution, climate change, the problem of finding clean water. I grew up near Flint. The loss of biodiversity, the breakdown of the human environment in our communities, global inequality. All of these are environmental problems. And notice climate change is just one among a much longer list. The environment is reaching a breaking point. There is a need for a solution, but the solution is not merely a technological fix or an economic fix or a political fix, but a change in the way we as human beings behave. What does he mean by that? To go to that, he looks into a gospel of creation. What does it mean to be human as part of God's plan? First of all, he emphasizes the meaning of the words in Genesis. The earth isn't ours to do with what we want. The phrase to dominate, to have reign over the earth that you find in Genesis is a poor translation. The better translation is to care for it like a shepherd cares for sheep, to care for it the way that a good king cares for a kingdom. The creation accounts in Genesis, plural because there's plenty more than one, human life is grounded in 3 fundamental, closely entwined relationships. Our relationship with God, our relationship with our neighbor, our relationship with the earth itself. The astonishing thing is that we are creatures. To quote the wonderful Anglican physicist and priest John Polkinghorne, we are not apprentice angels. We are not just spirits walking around trapped in these stupid bodies waiting for the good day when finally we can go flying off, like Casper the Ghost and do what we're really supposed to do as spirits. No! We were created with bodies on this earth. This earth matters. It matters so much that God sent his Son to redeem it. These relationships have all been broken. And what we call that breaking of those relationships, whether it's our relationship with God, or our relationship with our neighbor, or our relationship with the earth, they've been broken, and we call that breaking a sin. That is the root cause of the environmental breakdown, the sinfulness of everything that we do, because everything is connected to everything else. And this is chapter 3, the human roots. Science isn't going to save us. Economics isn't going to save us. Technology isn't going to save us. Think of it this way. The climate crisis, the pollution crisis, these are not the problems. These are the symptoms of the problems. And the problems are much deeper than that. We cannot fix our relationship with nature without fixing our sense of humanity itself and understanding our place in the world. And Christianity, the Pope says, of course, this is what he's selling, Christianity has the answer there if we're willing to listen to it. To quote Chesterton, it's not that Christianity was tried and found wanting, but rather it was found difficult and never tried. What he's speaking of is an integral ecology. The environment means more than nature, more than oceans and trees and birds. It includes the human ecology, the human environment, the social environment that we live in, whether we're in a city or a town or living on a farm. It means our own individual relationship with the place that we grew up in, the place where we live, the place that has meaning to us. I was born in Detroit. I haven't lived in Detroit since 1970. That's more years than many of you have been alive. But Detroit is still my home. And what happens there still affects me in a way that it wouldn't affect somebody who's never been there. I worked 3 summers in a little town outside of Flint. When I hear about the water crisis there, I know these people, I know this town. This is still where I have my roots. Every one of us has roots someplace. Every one of us has roots that we do not want to break, but we need to nourish, and we need to nourish the soil where we find those roots. The point is that it's all interconnected, nature and culture, people, future generations, past generations. Again, to quote my favorite Chesterton, he says, "Tradition is the democracy of the dead." Democracy says that every person has a right to a voice, regardless of the situation of how they were born. It should also be true of the situation of how they were died. Everyone, past, present, and future, are all part of the human condition. And we have to consider not only the immediate now, but the roots where we came from and the place where we hope our descendants will go. And that has to be reflected in the way we cooperate with God's design and with one another. What kind of world do we want to leave to those who come after us? Those of you with families and children, it's an immediate issue. But even a celibate male like me, I write books. I teach students. What world do I want them to have as they go on and teach their students? Even if you're a hermit living by yourself, the power of your hermitage is in relation to the people you're not talking to who know you're there. What do? First thing we do is to start talking to each other and start listening to each other. My friends who deny global warming are denying themselves a place at the table because the issues of pollution are real, the issues of climate change are real enough, even if I've got my science totally wrong. But just because the issue is real doesn't mean that his proposed solution is the best way to deal with things. And just because I reject his solution, because I know you don't know what you're talking about, doesn't mean that I have to deny the problem. My friends on the left are often really good at identifying problems and really lousy at coming up with solutions. My friends on the right oftentimes will deny the problem in the first place. Neither solution is what we need. We need the experience and knowledge of the positions and the roots we came from to talk to each other, to say, maybe that, that sounds great, but maybe that's not going to work. Maybe that's going to have unexpected consequences that make things worse rather than better. Let's talk this through. But let's accept that the other guys have something worth saying. And that's something that's terribly missing in the conversation right now. Yes, we need to do more to conserve energy and natural resources. Yes, it would be great if we could replace fossil fuels. Yes, when an economist is determining whether or not a business should do this or do that, it would be really useful to have an accurate assessment of all the costs. And the costs aren't necessarily the dollar costs that you see now. The human costs have a dollar effect, if nothing else. In the long run, if you don't pay your workers very well, they won't be able to buy your product. Henry Ford was smart enough to know that, and no one would call him a flaming liberal, though they did at the time. Profit, in the narrow sense, is an inadequate tool to use to make decisions about what do I really want to do, because it loses sight of the question that we ought to be asking, what is the outcome that I really want to have? More money in my pocket does me no good if society is falling apart around me. And if you don't understand that, try living in the third world, where there are some really, really wealthy people, but you can't drive from one side of Kenya to the other because the roads are terrible and you don't have gas stations where you can get your car fixed or buy fuel when you need. Everybody lives better when everybody lives better. How do we do this? There is the need for education. We need to know about our common origin, our mutual belonging, that the world has to be shared with everyone, including the people of the future. It's a challenge. It's a call for action, but mostly it's a call for a spiritual renewal, a way of looking at the entire world in a new spiritual way. Every creature reflects something of God. Every creature has a message to convey to the creatures around. And this includes the bug that lives for a minute and a half. This includes the elderly who are in the way. This includes the children we just as soon not look at. We have to change the way we think and the way we live. We have to get away from this I can do it all myself to a simpler, more selfless way. We've heard all this before. What does it really mean? There is a nobility in the duty to care for creation through little daily actions. And education can bring about a lot of this. Small ways we leave the world a better place. Orient your hearts to others. Renew your commitment to interdependence with the people around you. You need the folks who read those newspapers that you get mad at. You need the folks who read those websites that you think are crazy. You need the folks who disagree with you. Let's unpack a little bit of that. First of all, where is he getting all this from? How is he presenting it? Father James, a long Polish name that I can never pronounce, but he's a good friend of mine, writes for a blog called The Catholic Astronomer. And Google The Catholic Astronomer and you'll find it. It's actually sponsored on the Vatican Observatory Foundation's website. So I was involved in starting it, but Father James came along and has just done marvelous things. And he has a beautiful 6-part series, Unpacking Laudato Si, and pointed out a number of the things that I want to bring up here. First of all, I have a number of friends who are economists who were furious the first couple of times that they read this. He doesn't understand economics. I'd love to get him to sit down and really understand how the market system really works. Who are those radicals where he's getting these ideas from? They're radicals named Benedict and John Paul and bishops. He quotes from Patriarch Bartholomew. How curious. He's including members of the Eastern Church. A number of places he quotes a book most of you have never heard of, Das Ende des Neuzeit, The End of the Modern World, written in the 50s by Romano Guardini, it's an Italian name, he's German. He lived in and around Lake Como in northern Italy and describes the change as people stopped building buildings that would fit into the environment to bigger buildings that would dominate and reshape the environment. And I'm told that Pope Francis first encountered this writing when he was in southern Germany attempting to do a doctoral thesis after he had finished his time as provincial in Argentina. And my friend Father James says, it's interesting, underneath a lot of this is the work of Maximus the Confessor, who wrote in the 7th century, who talks of nature as a sacrament. And because he's from the Eastern Church, this theology is incorporated in a lot of the Orthodox theology. What is a sacrament? You know, I learned this from the Baltimore Catechism when I was a kid. We had to memorize it, and it's only as an older person that I remember what the words mean. A sacrament is a visible sign, part of the physical universe, that shows the presence of God. If the book of nature is something showing us the presence of God, if since the beginning of time God has revealed himself in the things he has made, that's a quote. Anybody catch where it's from? Paul's letter to the Romans. It's one of the few bits of the Bible I know because I'm a Catholic, but still. In that sense, nature is a sacrament. To defile nature is a sin on the same order as defiling the Eucharist. I'm not saying it's the same thing. It's on the same order. Think of it the same way. So, this is a quote from Laudato Si where Pope Francis is quoting a source. Technologically advanced societies must be prepared to encourage more sober lifestyles, reducing energy consumption, improving efficiency. What wild, crazy, unrealistic left-wing radical said that? Pope Benedict. Greater attention must be given to the needs of the poor, the weak, and the vulnerable in a debate often dominated by more powerful interests. Oh yeah, somebody's railing out against the capitalists that make our society work. What radical group is arguing against the capitalists who make a society work? Why, that bunch of left-wing radicals called the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. The principle of the subordination of private property to the universal destination of goods is a golden rule of social conduct, the first principle of the whole ethical and social order. The idea that I can't just hold on to mine, but I have to share with those who need. Sounds like communism to me. It's not surprising because the guy who said it came from a communist country, Pope John Paul. You will find over and over again when Francis is saying things that sound like they're a radical or a left-wing view of the world, he does it by quoting other bishops, other conferences, other popes. That's part of his style. Another issue that comes up, do I actually have to do what he says? After all, this is just his opinion, right? This is just his idea. There is this thing in the Catholic Church called Catholic social teaching. It was formulated as such by Pope Leo XIII. I say 12th there, it should be 13th. 1891, actually the same year that the Vatican Observatory was founded, in the Pope's encyclical Rerum Novarum on new things. Engagement with the modern world, forming an astronomical observatory at the Vatican was an example of being engaged in the modern world. We have to be engaged in the modern world. We have social teaching that is an essential part of being Catholic. And Pope Francis, in the very introductory paragraphs of this encyclical, says, "This encyclical letter is added to the body of the Church's social teaching. Dismiss it at your own risk." But he also says, on many concrete questions, the Church has no reason to offer a definitive opinion. She knows that honest debate must be encouraged among experts while respecting divergent views. But take a look around, at least admit that something's got to be done. I have heard people say that it's not the role of the Church to preach to us about economics, to preach to us about the work of the Church. Seeks not only to remind everyone of the duty to care for nature, but to protect mankind from self-destruction. Again, Pope Benedict. I'll remind you of something that is always good to remember. Too often as kids, we've heard the Church say, "Don't do that. Don't do that. No, don't do that." Actually, what the Church is saying is, no, don't do that. It can't be seen as a command so much as a plea. You're only going to hurt yourself. To the wealthy, there's nothing evil in wealth per se, but if you behave badly, you will not only make yourself miserable, you'll also wind up losing your wealth. Three important takeaways that I got from reading this encyclical. First of all, it's not about global warming. It's not about the ecology. The problems in the ecology are only symptoms of social problems and social justice problems, and these problems are real. Most of the world is living in a bad way. But it's not economics alone, it's not a revolution in politics that will change things, because all of these problems ultimately derive from personal sin. All of these problems ultimately derive from greed, avarice, lust, what are the great seven? Fortunately, I don't remember the other ones because I never commit them. Secondly, something that I noticed, it's very Jesuit. The whole point of Jesuit spirituality is to find God in all things. Things. The principle and foundation in the spiritual exercises has 4 points which can be summarized. Number one, we are created to praise, to reverence, to serve God. Number two, the things of the world have been created to help us do that. Number three, we're only to use the things that help us do that. And if things are going to lead us away from that goal, ignore them. Not destroy them, ignore them. Because maybe they'll help somebody else to that goal. Don't desire health, riches, honor, longevity. None of those things are bad, but none of those things are the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to desire that which helps us be what God created us to be. And you can be the richest person in the world, but if you're in the place that you don't belong, you're not going to be content. You're not going to be happy. God wants you to be happy. Isn't that a radical thought? Shocked me the first time I heard some Jesuit say that to me as an God wants me to be happy? How come nobody told me that before? I thought I was supposed to choose the thing that would make me miserable, right? No. Just don't choose the thing that's going to make you miserable in the long run. The way to solve all of these issues, according to Pope Francis, is to develop a new ethic. Technology. I love technology. I got the MIT ring. You know, it is possible to be a nerd and a fanatic at the same time. Wearing this collar and the ring, it gives you all sorts of wonderful experiences. In Rome, when I wear this ring, they think I'm a bishop. You know, I've had people come up and try to kiss the beaver on my brass rat. No. I love tech as much as anybody. But I know that like anything, technology can be abused. Like anything, technology can be addictive. Like anything, technology can be used to make me feel smarter than all you stupid people who don't have the same kind of phone that I've got because you're not as good as me. Or whatever. It can be a source of pride. It can be a source of avarice. It can be a route to lust and internet pornography. It can be a route to a lot of bad things. Getting rid of the technology won't get rid of the sins. They'll still be there. The technology that allows me to do wonderful things, by that very fact, also allows me to do terrible things. Economics needs more than just the invisible hand. There actually are a number of books coming out now. A friend of mine in Tucson who's an economist, something of a conservative. We have interesting conversations back and forth. But he says it's important to recognize that Adam Smith lost some of the principles of economics that were there in Aristotle and that were there in Thomas Aquinas, namely, more than just the invisible hand, the bigger question of what develops the human person. That's your goal, not maximizing profit. And if that's your goal, then you're going to make different decisions. The trouble is, it's a whole lot harder to quantify. And we tend to do things in terms of what we can quantify. Imagine what it would be like if a basketball game were judged only on how beautiful the players were rather than who got the score at the end of the day. And yet, the fact of the matter is, you're more likely to go to a basketball game that's well played. There is an element to that. That's why we watch basketball games. Ecology is not hugging a tree or saving the whales. And in a lot of different ways, Francis emphasizes this over and over again. We are not gods, but nature is also not divine. We are both creatures together. So the two straw men that everyone can see are kind of goofy, but we know exist. The one who says, I'm the human being, I get to make what I want. When I was teaching at Lafayette College, a little school in Pennsylvania before I was a Jesuit, there was the Kirby Hall of Civil Rights. Wonderful. The law school was a hall of civil rights. And across in big letters put up there in the 1920s was the phrase from the Bible, "Do I not have the right to do what I will with mine own?" Huh? To Mr. Kirby, having to pay taxes was a violation of his civil rights. Who was the government to say that they could take his money that he earned? Well, no, that's not our idea of civil rights. That's a misstatement of what that passage of the Bible is trying to say. You don't have the right to dominate nature. You have the responsibility to steward nature. On the other hand, there is nothing we can do that doesn't leave a footprint on the earth. We can't remove ourselves entirely from nature. Every time we take a breath, we're putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Even if we were to commit suicide, our rotting bodies would be stinking up the atmosphere. Our goal is not to not leave a footprint. We can't do that. Our goal is not to say that the whales have priority over starving children. We can't say that. Our goal is rather to make sure that the good we do is worth the cost we impose. And the good we do is not always obvious, but every human being, no matter how awful, and speaking as a Detroit Tigers fan, I have to say even Blue Jays fans, have to be respected as God's creatures, capable of good. Basically, if you don't find something in this encyclical that bothers you, that disturbs you, that makes you squirm, that makes you want to say, wait a minute, you forgot about, but no, it's not that easy, but wait, then you haven't read it. And I don't care what lifestyle you have, what politics you have, if you aren't made to squirm by something in here, you've missed the point. I'm reminded of a phrase quoted recently by my friend Jim Martin. It's by the light of God that we can see our shadows. It is not a call to a new social order. I was reminded of this and give to you one of the wonderful pieces of literature of the 20th century that nobody knows. T.S. Eliot wrote a play called The Rock, and in it there are a series of choruses that critique society. He wrote it in the 1930s. Think of what this phrase means in light of a society that thought it had to choose between fascism and communism. They constantly try to escape from the darkness outside and within by dreaming of systems so perfect that no one will need to be good. Isn't that the temptation? If only my party got elected, then everything will be perfect. If only I make sure that other party doesn't get elected, then everything will be perfect. No, there is no system that works without the goodwill of the people involved. There is no system so perfect that no one needs to be good. Any call to action that concentrates on what those other people ought to be doing denies the problem. Because the problem isn't capitalism, it isn't the tree huggers, it isn't those other people, although all of those things at some point are going to be needed to be addressed. But if you're not a wealthy capitalist, don't worry about the wealthy capitalists, because you've got something in your plate. What is on your plate? There's so much to do that what I say is start with the easy stuff. Anything you do, that's an improvement. And don't make these big resolutions. I decided at the beginning of the year I was going to lose 10 pounds. I've only got 13 to go. Don't try to make impossible resolutions that you can't keep. Get yourself into the habit of doing the small things. Lent is coming up. Try eating smaller meals just during Lent, just at lunch. Get yourself into the habit of having meatless Fridays. Get yourself in the habit of, not because meat is bad, though it can be, not because eating food is bad, try not eating food. That's even worse. It's no credit to you to give up things that you shouldn't be doing in the first place. But there are plenty of things that we know we shouldn't be doing that we can cut back on. Cut back a little bit at a time. Build up the strength to be able to live without the thing that you thought for sure you couldn't possibly live without. And it can be anywhere from giving up on desserts. It can be deciding you're not going to watch a Netflix movie every night and you're going to read a book, or heaven forbid, even pray. Whatever it is that you find yourself obsessing over and saying, I couldn't possibly give up, maybe that's something to look at for Lent, just for Lent. Try living without it for 40 days, see if you can do it. Start with the easy stuff. When that's taken care of, the stuff that looked like hard stuff will become easy stuff. And I'll end with one of my favorite passages, again from Chesterton, in one of my favorite books called Orthodoxy. And he's talking about paganism, the paganism of the ancient Greeks and Romans. And he reminds us the essence of all pantheism was that nature was our mother. That's the main point. But the main point of Christianity is nature is not our mother, nature is our sister. Remember the phrases that Francis uses in his Laudato Si, St. Francis. Nature was a solemn mother to the worshippers of Isis and Cybele. Nature was a solemn mother to Wordsworth or to Emerson, but to St. Francis, nature is a sister, and even a younger sister, a little dancing sister to be laughed at as well as loved. And if that's your view of nature, then think about what you're doing to your little sister. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Brother Guy. We'll now have some time for questions. Just so that questions are audible for all of us in the room, I'd ask that you go to the south ambo right there to ask them. The floor is yours.
And you ask anything, and if I don't want to answer it, I'll tell you. And if I can't answer it, I'll tell you. But if you can go to the microphone so people can hear, that'd be a whole lot easier. Okay. Going once? Going twice? Thank you. Somebody brave. I was brave enough to stand up here and say these foolish things. So, go ahead.
A comment and then an actual question.
Sure.
I'm a general system scientist, a physics prof here at UT. Bob Logan's my name. And what I loved about Laudato Si was that it really embraced general systems thinking, that everything is connected. I also had the privilege of working with Marshall McLuhan at St. Michael's College, where I'm a fellow. And there was one thing in the encyclical that really caught my attention, which you didn't mention tonight. I'm not trying to call you out. But what really impressed me in the encyclical was Pope pointing to rapidification. The fact that we do things faster and faster, more and more, which is at the root of this problem of mass consumption. So my question is, would you please comment on this?
I would have used a different word in the translation. I'm not sure what the sense of the hurry up of the world, the sense that it's essential that I follow what's going on, that I don't miss a single tweet, and so I've got to be constantly checking my Twitter account. I had a coffee with a great friend today, and in the middle of the coffee, there were the two of us checking our emails on our cell phones. I did it too. And since she's in the audience, she's wincing right now and will probably throw things at me. How many times have we heard people say to slow down? People keep saying it because we need to keep hearing it. If nothing else, I have found it essential in my life to not go to my office on Sunday. Where I work at the observatory, I live upstairs from my office and my lab. And there are all sorts of important things that need to be done, and people are demanding my attention. And I've had to just instill a rule in myself. I'm going to turn the computer off on Saturday at noon and not turn it back on until Monday morning. And even if it means that I know this stuff I want to get to. No, nothing is that important. Nothing is going to hang on whether you answered it Monday afternoon or Saturday afternoon or Monday morning. Nobody is essential. One of the hard things I had to do as a director was there was a guy in our group who had made himself essential. And the first thing I had to do was say, no, you're not. Because any one of us can be run over by a truck tomorrow, and all of us are going to grow old and die if that doesn't happen. None of us are essential. None of our work is essential that way, short of caring for the sick. And that should not be one person doing 24/7. It's important that we take a break. It's, goes back to the first book of Genesis. Give yourself a break. And that includes your animals. And that's a reference that the Pope does make in the encyclical. Slow down, you move too fast. You got to make the morning last. Didn't mean you.
The framework of viewing technology as something that is essentially governed by our will to use it one way or another. It obviously invites the debate over what is the nature of technology.
We could not live in cities without it.
That you seem to feel that was such an answered question. And if somebody says that technology is having effects we can't control, somebody can just come back at it with, well, but then we just have to be more strong in our moral beliefs about what is right and wrong to do with technology. You can go back and forth with that, but what really surprised me is just that you didn't even see that as a question.
I'm sorry I didn't get into that. Because you're absolutely right. Your point is spot on. One of the most eco-friendly ways to live is to live in a big city, because you're not spreading yourself out over the countryside. If a city is well designed, you can walk to the grocery store, you can get your, but that's only possible with technology. That's only possible with a support system, and it makes you dependent on a technology that is beyond your control, which maybe is not a bad thing. It makes you realize that you're dependent on the people around you.
So you don't think technology has any directions to be harmful and out of control, and that is worse than just a moral question? That was my real point. Is that it's not really a moral question. It's not what do we choose to do with technology. It's do we let it out of control, and then we won't be able to choose.
A wonderful way of phrasing it. Thank you.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. My question has to do with mysticism and Christian mysticism and how we relate to nature as a result of that. And I loved the statement that you made that each creature kind of reveals the light of God in its own unique way. And it made me think of Meister Eckhart. God is in all creatures are God.
Right.
And certainly the opening poem of St. Francis is so beautifully mystical. So my question is, somehow I had the feeling growing up as a young Catholic in the 70s that like our church kind of bought into this sort of Cartesian dualism and this kind of mechanistic relationship to nature. And I'm wondering if you could comment on that. And then the second part of my question would be, I do remember as a young Catholic in the 70s hearing about our duty to our brothers and sisters, duty to the poor. Why have we not heard more about our duty to creatures and the earth from the pulpit?
Talk to the people who work in the pulpit on that one. I think there are so many things to talk about and so many things. Part of it is the nature of the people who wind up in the clergy. And now that I'm a Jesuit and living among them, I'm both far more sympathetic to the pressures that they're under and amazed that more people don't take advantage of the wonderful life of being a religious in one way or another. It's been a great life for me. To go back to your first question, like everything, there's a balance. It's like being on a bicycle. You can't just lean one way or the other and always get it. It's important to recognize that while you can see God in nature, nature is not God. It's important to recognize that nothing in excess can also be taken to excess. What I think really happened, and you're talking about you're growing up in the 70s, I grew up in the 60s, kids now growing up in the aughts. I think our teachers reflect the philosophy of 30 years earlier when they were learning their philosophy. And the great temptation or challenge to be aware of the times but not captured by the times. The dualism that you're talking about, I know exactly what you mean, but that was the credo of the 50s, where science and technology won the war. And never mind that, the credo of 10 years later, starting with Rachel Carson in the 50s, was that technology is not always an unalloyed good. The important thing to me as a mystic, when it comes to mysticism, I'm very much rooted in the Jesuit sense of a contemplative inaction. Now, I can recognize that not everybody has to be a contemplative in action. Some people are really good at being contemplatives, and some people are really good at being in action, and you need both. And if you're able to balance the two, great. But I think it also goes to show how we are interconnected as people. We need the poets. We need the engineers. And a world that had not one or the other would be a nightmare.
Brother Guy, could we learn to behave in a better way by looking at our indigenous peoples on the planet? They seem, from what you were saying, they seem to have a better system than we have.
I'm hesitant to state that. I lived in Kenya for 2 years and saw what people were like living close to nature. And there's a word for people who live close to nature. It's called starving. I hesitate to say that there is any simple answer like that. I heard an interesting talk from an anthropologist who was looking at the records of graveyards of the last 2 million years of human life. And they say when you look at skeletons, you find that evidence of organized violence of one group against another really only arises about 10 million years ago, or 10,000 years ago, as society became more settled and there was more to fight over. But to make everybody poor may solve the problem of war, but it's a system so perfect that nobody needs to be good, it doesn't work. First of all, we are a fallen people. We lost paradise, remember? We're not going to come up with an answer. We can learn from people who are willing to say, I don't need the latest iPod if it means an injustice elsewhere. But we also have to be a people who are able to say, I can use the latest iPod or whatever if it brings me closer to God and the people around me closer to God, and it gives me the freedom and the opportunity and the power to have the free time to recognize and pray with God more. It's a very dangerous thing to romanticize any one particular lifestyle. We're all fallen people, we're all capable of sin, and we're all going to be sinners. I speak to a crowd of Catholics here. There's a reason why God gave us the sacrament of penance. He knows we all need it. And that's another reason to think that there is no system that's going to make us all, not needing to be good.
Thank you.
Thank you for the excellent conference. I'm teaching here at U of T Natural Resources Management. At the same time, I have been teaching international business and engineering economics. I have a very conflict situation, as you could imagine. I could feel that I like hiking. I have been in mountains in South America. Really love the nature. I've been also working with the development banks in sustainable projects, but the issue of the development of natural resources, especially hydrocarbon-based resources, which are in conflict sometimes with water resources development, is a different issue in developing countries than in developing world. Okay? The issue of saving resources as nature and environment for the future generation is different in the developing countries. In developing countries, they have to survive for the current generation, for the current children that they don't have resources. And the government have been making most of the country with natural resources, most of the government have making a disaster of government and economic policy. But how do you, I haven't had the opportunity of reading the encyclical, how do you balance, or do you think that there is a difference in the treatment of developing natural resources, even carbon-based resources, in the developing world, where you could save for the future generation, not using carbon-based resources, or using the only resources that in some countries they have is hydrocarbon that contaminate the environment, kill the environment, but that's the only way to get source to import food for the children that are dying every day by thousands, like the case of South America.
I'll speak from the point of view of the encyclical, because obviously it's a huge,
The question is about
the encyclical.
the encyclical.
And the important thing, it's quite clear that the Pope is speaking as someone from South America who sees the world from the lens of what he has seen in Argentina, which again is not even typical of South America, has its own peculiar history and economics. But also he quotes quite a bit from the bishops' conferences of Paraguay and some of the more impoverished, closer to the equator countries. That's why he does not dictate solutions, but recognizes that there's got to be a better way than what we're doing. And certainly the hard thing is, as someone from the wealthy North, you want to say, just as parents who grew up in the 60s, you want to tell your kids, don't do drugs, I was there, I did it. And all they're going to hear is, you were there, you did it, wow. It sounds paternalistic to say, don't make the mistakes we made. We've got to have something more than that to back it up. And yet, an awful lot of our message has to be, don't make the mistakes we made. There are maybe better ways of doing it. There are maybe better resources, but there is no perfect solution. Solar cells are great, but it's actually a very polluting thing to produce those guys. Hydropower is great, but yeah, it floods rivers and destroys the ecosystem. Wind power is great, but it kills birds. Any kind of centralized power is great, but then it's a prime source of someone who will have control over that centralized power. Decentralized power is great, but then there's nobody who knows what the heck they're doing, making sure that you don't blow things up or do terrible damage to you and your immediate neighbors. There is no perfect solution. But the very first step is to recognize that there's a problem, and then to use the expertise of people like yourself to advise in a specific case at a specific time, maybe this is what we want to do. Because I don't have the answer. The Pope doesn't have the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you for your talk. So you said that if you read Laudato Si, you're bound to struggle with something. So the thing I struggled with was one of the, I would say, minor points, and I haven't heard any commentary on it. And it's this one passage where Pope Francis says the church is looking for a world political authority. And so those three words together really caught my attention, and it's the thing that I remember most about the encyclical. So I'm just looking for some explanation and I guess the context that you said this in.
Nobody's taking responsibility, I guess, is the problem that he's seeing. That there are global problems that people are attempting to attack piecemeal. But there's nobody willing to be able to take on the global issues, to encourage a multinational corporation when they're doing well and to discourage them from doing badly if they can simply slip from one country to another. We need, at the very least, a coordination. We need an operating United Nations. And it doesn't mean a one world government. I don't think he's looking for that. His whole point in the church is to decentralize. He wants the local bishops to have more authority, but he also wants a place where they can talk to each other. And I suspect that's where he's going with that. I have to confess, the part that really bugged me was the one paragraph where he went off on air conditioning. I live in Tucson, come on. But, maybe I don't need to have it quite as cold in my room. Everybody's going to find one thing that catches you. Thanks.
It kind of leads off that. Speaking as one of the younger people here, finding the other side, as you mentioned, speaking to the, just because your message I don't think is right doesn't mean I should listen to you. That's what's starting the conversation. I don't think there's many people in my generation who say, climate change doesn't exist. I'm not going to get to speak to Al Gore. I won't talk to the oil tycoons. Even my friends who work in the oil industry admit they're doing harm. Who do I talk to? Who do I start the conversation with?
Part of it might simply be to find out, to expand your circle of friends, which is tough to do, especially when you can, block the people on Twitter you don't want to hear from, mostly because you've heard it all before. I don't blame you for blocking them, I do too. But to get perhaps, and this is one of the points that the Pope is suggesting, to get out of the world of the electronic media and more in the world of talking face to face with the people who live next door to you, the people who live. One of the great things of being a student were the late night conversations in the dorms. What happens when we no longer actually physically attend the school and live in the dorms? Will we have those conversations anymore? One of the great things of being a church is that in this room, you're going to find probably a representative of every political view, maybe not proportionate to the population, but they're in here. If we stop attending churches and find Jesus on our own, will we have the benefit of that? One of the great benefits of going home for Thanksgiving or Christmas is hearing your crazy uncle and listening to him and trying to figure out where do we have a point in contact in common. And when he's saying crazy things, what is it he's really afraid of? When I get terrified and want to say crazy things, what is it that I'm really afraid of? Because I think an awful lot of the tribalism that comes up in our society comes from fear, comes that we don't have the confidence. And a lot of it, and this is something directly addressed in the encyclical, is the sense that we don't have a sense of identity of ourselves, we don't have confidence in ourselves if we don't have work, if we don't have a role in the world that says, this is who I am. In our culture, when you meet somebody, you say, what's your name, where you're from, what do you do? And if you can't answer, what do I do? Then there's a hole in yourself. This is an issue that is mentioned specifically in the encyclical. And I think a lot of what we can do is address the sources of fears that cause people to shut themselves off from the things they're afraid of.
Thank you.
We should probably wind it up fairly soon. I'll take one more, and then, so this is your chance.
Thank you. Actually, in my family, I am the crazy uncle. In one of Richard Rohr's recent meditations, he said that there are 7.4 billion people on this planet. Is that too many?
It depends what you mean. Can we feed them? If we had the proper distribution of food, we could feed them. Every person is an opportunity. We have the ability to make music, to do art, to do science, to have creativity at twice what we had when I was a child, when there were only 3 billion people on the face of the earth. But there's got to be a limit to what the earth can sustain. The Pope addresses this in an interesting way in the encyclical. And he says, yes, there's got to be a better distribution of who's where and the demographics of trying to crowd too many people in too small a space. But to simply say, all you other people stop having kids, is a shortcut to try to justify us living the comfortable lifestyle we're in. And that can't be the answer either. It was an interesting dichotomy in what he has to say. I'm not sure what the proper balance of the number of people would be. What I'd love to see is 10 billion people, but a quarter of them on planet Mars. But then what that would do to the ecology of planet Mars is another question that we'll have to answer a different day. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming.
I think that I can speak on behalf of all present here that it was a certainly very wonderful presentation that we had here tonight. Brother Guy's presentation helped us to reflect on our common home, our earth, not something that we own and exploit, but where we certainly have a place to be as faithful stewards. And in this, that we are all very interconnected. And I think the importance of having that conversation where all have that space at the table, it's important that we start to do that. And certainly this presentation tonight is not meant to be comprehensive, the first and the last, but certainly to be the catalyst to help us be part of that conversation. And that certainly would be what Cardinal Newman, our patron, would advocate for, to be that place, that home, where we can bring people together, people from different fields, in order to foster that mature conversation that can help to bring change that is very real. And then the last point, also that faith has a very important place at that table. Faith that can help us also to see ourselves, who we are in the eyes of God, and also to help us on that process of conversion, of change. And change that it happens a little at a time. I think that's very, very important. And talking about change and conversion, a little plug. So 2 days from now, it's Ash Wednesday, and we have our services here at 12:15 and 7 p.m. All are welcome. Kidding aside, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Brother Guy for making time for us in his very busy schedule, and I invite all present to join us in the house afterwards for a moment of fellowship. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us, and also it would be great to see you again for future lectures and events that we have here at the Newman Center. Thank you.